Board Meeting. As always, if there is time at the end of this session, we'll have some questions or comments from those of you who've kindly joined us from the public. Yet again, we've got a really full day for the board, so we do need to keep to time, so just see how we go. We have apologies this morning from Michael Marr and from Steve, and Mike has an appointment somewhere else, will arrive at some point during the meeting, but not quite sure how early he's going to be able to get here. Minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of March, are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much indeed. So the action log, everything I think is either not due or, well, in fact, everything is not due at the moment, so that's okay. So let's hope, yeah, that's a positive. Is there anything arising from the minutes of the last meeting that's not otherwise on the agenda anybody wanted to raise? Perfect. That moves us nicely ahead of time, and quickly, David, on to your report.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, everybody. I'll do this very briefly because it's a report which runs to 7 pages, but it's really updates on positions and circumstances and situations that I think members of the board should be familiar with. So the monthly performance report is there, which reports on February, and that's at Annex 1. The only thing I'd pick out of note from that report is productivity for the first time is on plan with expectations, and you can see in the bottom paragraph on page 1 that both adult social care and PMS have continued to increase productivity of inspectors, and that's responsible for that improvement in performance. I don't intend to present any more detail in relation to the performance report than that. It's there, it speaks for itself. You've scrutinised this in previous meetings, and the trends that are apparent there are continuing, with that one exception of improvements in productivity through Andrea and Steve's teams, which is very positive and good news. The other good news is that PMS have completed the dental inspections, and Mike and his team have completed all the non-specialist acute trusts, which was a commitment that we made to Parliament, and we discharged that by at the end of March. The reports are still to be produced, and they'll be done over the next 3 months. What follows next then is some updates from the various directorates. From Andrea, you've got an update in relation to the dispatches programme and the action that has been taken in relation to the branches in both Haringey, and intended action in relation to Tower Hamlets branches to carry out an inspection. The purpose of that is just to ensure that those people who clearly got suboptimal care from the Haringey branch, if the service is transferred to the Tower Hamlets branch, are receiving acceptable care. I'm reporting on the bottom of page 4, an error in the provider information return, which was a mistake that was made here in CQC, which caused some distress to organisations that have provided information to us. That information was lost. Action was taken across the senior management team to ensure that the problem was put right, and an apology was issued to those people that had actually undertaken the work. And it's important, I think, in the interest of our transparency, that we report that to the board and use that analysis to improve. Steve isn't around, and I don't have any specific updates to bring to the attention of the board over and above the improvements in productivity that I've already referred to, so I'll not dwell on that. Mike, if he was here, would draw attention to the issuing of Section 29A warning notice, which we did, and we published that through a letter before we published the final report. This isn't what we normally do, but was a reflection of the significant concerns around the governance at Southern Health. that we found on the most recent inspection, and again, I just wanted to draw that to the board's attention. We've now received confirmation from the Secretary of State about the thematic review, which is something that he asked us to do following the Southern Health, which is an investigation into deaths across the NHS mental health acute and maternity settings. If you remember, this was a question about how was Southern, in relation to they've carried out inquiries, an outlier from the NHS, or was this something that was consistent? And we were asked to undertake this review to actually arrive at a view. I don't think anybody had robust evidence to actually say yes, it was an outlier, or no, it wasn't an outlier. So we've been asked to do this job, and that work will now progress beyond the planning stage and into delivery stage. The mental health policy team have been doing some work around approved mental health professionals. These are the professionals that need to be involved in a decision to detain somebody under the Mental Health Act, and this is something that flows from the Mental Health Crisis Care Concordat, where we've undertaken a number of pieces of work following the publication of that report last year. We were probably asked to do about 4 or 5 different things under the Crisis Care Concordat, and the review that we've carried out in relation to approved mental health professionals now completes all the activity that we were asked to undertake under the Crisis Care Concordat. In terms of content and the review of HMPs, it's local authorities that are responsible for making the arrangements for HMPs and taking that forward. We do not have any legislative powers to regulate AMHPs, and so there's a limit in a sense to what we do. I'm not suggesting or proposing that we should ask for any extension of our powers in this respect. So what we've done is set out what it is that we can do and the contribution we can make. I think the concern here is whether there's sufficient AMHPs available to actually satisfy the demand for assessments under the mental health legislation. We've got an update on the progress in relation to the review and reorganisation of the way that we register staff that Andrea has been leading. The work we've been doing jointly with Ofsted in relation to the Special Educational Needs Disability Inspection Programme is now complete. The handbook is going to be published later this month, and we'll begin to make a contribution to that inspection programme from May of next year. And then finally, the data security review. If you remember, last August, the Secretary of State asked us to do a review of data security in the NHS. We were asked to produce this by the end of January of this year, which we did. That report has been sent through to him, and the decision about publishing that sits with the Secretary of State. He will have to take a view on that. I think there is, I think it's highly likely that this report will be published after the European referendum, and I think this is as much to do with when the pre-election period starts as anything else. So I just wanted to draw attention to that. We're not being pursued on this report, we're not being asked about this report, but it is something that we've signed off and sent in, and I just wanted to draw that to the board's attention. It's not a big issue as far as I'm concerned, but it is something just for the board to be aware of. So that's the report, Peter.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. So does anybody wish to raise points? Lewis.
Thanks very much. First of all, on the investigation of deaths in learning disability and mental health patients, I think this is a really important piece of work. Actually, it's obvious this has become quite a major issue about safety. It's probably one of the highest profile issues on patient safety in the NHS at the moment, and our role in this will be very important. I do think this will be a very important piece of work. But there is a slight sense out there, it's more than slight, that how many times can we demonstrate the problem before there is a solution? and it does feel a little bit like that, even though I suspect our piece of work will be helpful and will sort of push things on a bit. And it's quite likely that what will come out of this work is not a particularly clear answer to the question you're asking about whether any individual trust is an outlier. And that what we will get to is that every area should have a system for considering all deaths by people with learning disability and mental illness. So there's some way in which all of deaths are at least looked at by someone, and the medical examiner role may well help that when it comes in. And secondly, that there'll be an investigative system which is then places priority on deaths where there's an opportunity for learning, and there may be other reasons as well. There may be public concern, family pressures, and so on. There'll be other reasons why certain deaths will be investigated more than others, but there'll be a system in which, once every death's been considered, there is that decisions are made as to which go forward into a full investigative process. And then there'll be proposals for renewed learning locally and also nationally. That's one of the main problems. So my prediction is that that's where we'll get to. And so the question is, how long will we take before we get to that point? And I think we should get on with this. I think there's a lot of frustration in people outside that this is another round of discussion about the nature of the problem, whereas in fact the solutions are reasonably clear already. So I just want to make sure we've got the right timescale for this, which is short, has to be short. But also that we're engaging some of those rather disillusioned groups. I mean, it's often, there's a sort of history to this whole problem, and a core part of the history is the keeping the families at arm's length. I just want to make sure that we, in doing this work, don't repeat that problem, and that so that we don't mirror the reasons why we're there in the first place. That families are closely involved in the piece of work. Can I stop there in case you want to answer that? But I want to make a point about AMHPs as well, if that's okay.
So thanks, Lewis. I don't know that I'd want to predict what the outcome is, and I think this is a genuine piece of work. I think I'm not sure that I've been involved in some of the conversations that you obviously have been in, but I think there is a genuine desire to want to understand this process better without predicting it, and we go into this with an open mind. The timetable for this is we are aiming to publish a report by December of this year, and we will work with trusts, we will work with families affected by these issues, and with other national bodies. We aim to do some field work as well as some wider evidence gathering from people that have got a view about this and want to make a contribution. So when I said whilst we've been waiting for the Secretary of State to come back to us on the requests that we'd sent in, a team have been looking at what are the methodologies for how we would take this forward. I'm personally not aware that at the national level anybody's done any work in relation to speaking to families. It's not just learning disabilities as well, this is all deaths. So a number of the cases that have come to us by virtue of complaints have often come from families who have talked about how they've felt isolated from and separated from processes that go on. So it is an important part of what we are aiming to do. We will identify the challenges experienced by both families and trusts, but we also have a view about showcasing examples of good practice. We're already collecting some of that information and making that connection between open and reflective learning cultures which exist in some of the trusts. I mean, again, if Mike was here, he'd reflect on that. And I think our objective is to make some recommendations for improvements. I think we have done some background work on this, and as I say, following this approval, we'll now go on to the next stage of it. So I really don't know what we're going to find in relation to it. I'd want us, because of the point you began with, just how important this is to learning, for that to be the thing that we actually lead with. I don't think this is an accountability review. I think this is a review that genuinely goes into how do we learn. If you remember, safety is one of the lowest performing areas of all of our inspections in this, and this is, as you said, a key contribution to safety. So I do think this is a genuine area where we are going to make a contribution to informing what it is that goes on. So now that you've raised this issue about the kind of discussion out there and perhaps some of the kind of, I don't know, scepticism about what we're going to do, we can actually, move forward in that context and know that's the context that some people are approaching this in.
Kay, you're following on from that, because I know Lewis wants to raise around the point. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, this is looking at how deaths are investigated. Is it unexpected deaths or is it all deaths? Because there's quite a lot of confusion in people's mind that people with mental health problems and with learning disability, they can die up to, is it 20 years earlier or 10, 20 years earlier? But that main causes of that, at least the main cause, is smoking, I think. And I'm just thinking whether the review will, is clear enough that we're looking at the causes of the deaths. Do you see what I mean? I mean, some deaths might be unexpected, but they might not be. They could be due to sort of things that happened years ago or other factors.
So I think these are the deaths which occur for people in services where there's learning to be extracted from the way that those deaths have taken place. And we've not used in the terms of reference, to the best of my knowledge, unexpected deaths, but clearly there is an aspect of that. But I don't think this is a public health investigation into why some people die earlier than others, just to get it. So I think it's driven by what happens to people in services rather than those shocking figures that you've just quoted about life expectancy being 20 years less for people with a mental health problem, people in prison, homeless people, etc., etc. So
it's a communication issue. So.
Shall I just make a point of that? I mean, I think you're absolutely right. My view is that the expected divide is very unhelpful in this situation, because there's a sense in which deaths are slightly downgraded because they were expected, and some that are still thought to be seen as unexpected actually had preventable factors long before they got to that point. So I think my understanding is that we will ignore that. Well, not ignore, but we won't be driven by that dichotomy, and so I think that will solve it.
So, Lewis, I haven't forgotten you've got another point, but Jane, did you wanted to follow on? Yes.
Somebody made the point about it's quite difficult, easy enough to describe the problem. It's that awful, how do you then move it on into action and making something happen? And Healthwatch, you'd expect me to blow our trumpet, Healthwatch is involved in this Southern Cross thematic review that David's described. And we are very happy. But what works with us seems to be if you can get the right people round a table. I think Healthwatch can provide a bit of a safe space somehow for some of these big, tricky discussions where you've got several big beasts in the jungle that are trying to sort themselves out. So we're very happy to help in any way. But the key thing is this point that was made about moving on from the problem into actually making some real change happen. And we've got some track record of making some real change happen.
Great, thanks. Paul, were you wanting to come in? Sorry, I don't know.
The thing I was going to say was on this point about will it be just a review and then it'll be 6 months or 9 months and then, with a bit of luck, things will move to action. Part of the governance in the CQC is to look at all the thematics in advance and check out the scoping. In this particular case, we'll be doing two things. We're responding to a specific request from the Secretary of State and we will meet that request. Under the powers. What we don't intend to do, and Paul Elliott was very clear about this, is wait until the end of the review before we're thinking about how any of the proposed recommendations can be implemented. So we'll be working with partners across the system. So as you suggest a whole series of hypotheses that we might find. But as we're developing those, we're also actively thinking about how they can be put into practice quickly. I think that's quite important to get our role right. We're one component of the system, but we encourage improvement. So the way we work with other system partners to make things happen quickly is also important, and that's what we intend to do.
just before we leave this, David, do you just want to
what I've just whispered to Peter is there's normally a lead board member for a review, so I don't know whether we've identified a lead board member for the thematic review, but if there's a contribution that you others want to make, then I think that's an opportunity to satisfy yourself that your prediction is either going to be fulfilled or not fulfilled, quite frankly. As I say, I'm slightly more open-minded about where this is going to go. If you remember, where did this come from? It came from Southern being criticised for not carrying out reviews for the deaths of those people in services. And I think there was a very genuine inability to say whether that was something that was generalisable, that was happening everywhere, or whether that was a one-off. So that's a bit about being open-minded. I really don't know. And it wasn't about do some high-profile cases get reviews, but it was does every case get the review that it deserves. Your point about reviewers, I think Robert's raised this point previously, is germane to this, but it really is about how do organisations generate a learning culture, and I think that's what we're looking to explore and open up and make a contribution to that debate.
And Lewis, I don't want you to be sort of feel you're bounced into anything right now, but it's a conversation that we can have outside the meeting. Andrea.
I mean, just to add to that in terms of the point that people have made about identifying both good practice and poor practice, somebody who's been very interested in this debate over the last 2 or 3 years, a researcher called George Julian, has actually done a very, very impressive piece of work looking at what trusts are doing around the review of deaths, and particularly in terms of their response to the Mazars report at Southern. And what comes out of that is that there are some places that are doing some good work in reviewing what's happened. Clearly, there are others where that may not be the case. And I've flagged up that piece of work to the team that are working with Paul Elliott and Paul Bater around this, so that they can take that forward into it. So there's the contributions that are being made, which I think is really incredibly helpful.
Good, thank you. Lewis, you're another point.
Sorry, it's just that this is. I was very pleased, I must say, to see this piece of work about the AMPs, as they're called, the approved mental health professionals, practitioners. They who are, which is, just to be clear, is an expanded approved social worker role that was created from the last revision of the Mental Health Act, and it's an absolutely crucial role in relation to the safety of patients who are in crisis and the rights of people who are detained under the Mental Health Act. So it's an absolutely crucial role. And it has run into quite a lot of difficulties, and the main difficulty is that there aren't enough people doing the job. And more than that, those that are in post are often called away to do other things because of other pressures on social work in general in a local authority. So they're often distracted, and therefore the effect of that is that people who are waiting to be formally detained under the Mental Health Act sometimes have to wait hours before that process can be complete. So it's a very important rights issue that the AMP role is strengthened. So I think it's very good that we played a part in that. Very good that some work is happening on it. But I just wanted to pick up the point about our responsibility, because obviously we don't regulate local authorities, and they are the employers of AMPs, although there are other models around as to exactly who AMPs work for. But what we do is examine and oversee the workings of the Mental Health Act. And they are at the core of the Mental Health Act for the reasons that I've said. And so I just hope that one of the things that will come out of this work, I'm slightly unclear what DH is going to do actually, is workforce planning. We seem to have given up on that in the last few years. So I hope that our role will be strengthened here as well, so that when we examine what is happening to people who are detained under the Mental Health Act, the contribution that AMPs are able to make, or for that matter the obstacles to making it, I think that needs to be a crucial part of what we observe. I think we can play a role, even though we're not regulating their employers. We can play a role in strengthening their function, and this maybe is the springboard to do that.
So apologies if I didn't draw this out. So towards the bottom of the paragraph, what we do say here is that as part of our Mental Health Act reviews, we will begin to gather the evidence about how this role is being discharged and how it's making a contribution to, as you say, that very, very important issue about people's rights in the way that the decisions are made about their detention and indeed treatment. So we are proposing to do that. I think the other thing we're flagging in here is that there's other pieces of work going on which are going to make a contribution to this. There is a debate going on about the future of social work. The College of Social Work has been dissolved. There's discussions going on in both DH and the Department for Education about establishing a new social work body. There's a debate about whether that will have a separation between children and adults work. The other 3 home countries are not separating children and adults work. There is a debate taking place about whether that should be. My personal view is social work is generic. It should specialise at postgraduate level. So there are some really, really important debates going on about this which surround this debate. But what we're saying is our role in relation to this is to ensure that when we carry out our Mental Health Act reviews, we will assess the evidence of how these professionals are working to support the delivery of appropriate mental health services at a local level. So that's, I think, what we're going to focus on, Lewis. There are bigger debates going on. So I think what we're trying to do is position this in a thoughtful and intelligent way about how we can make a contribution to this debate, whilst holding on to the scope that we've got and not letting that scope creep beyond what it is that we're capable of delivering. So that's what we're trying to do. I think we do need to make a contribution to these bigger debates. And, you know, we touched on some social care issues at the dinner last night. We very rarely touch on social work. We talk a lot about doctors and nurses, but actually these are critical professionals for delivering. The other thing about this is it was removed from social work by calling them other professionals as well. So there's as many nurses doing this now, as I understand it, as there are social workers. But the key issue is it is part of the bigger debate about the future of some of these professional roles. But our role is going to focus on the Mental Health Act reviews and just making sure that it's there. And, you know, I'll commend Paul Elliott. He's done a fabulous job in the time he's been employed by us by strengthening our mental health capability, capacity, and I think we're now much more proactive in the way that this work is taken forward than we've been hitherto.
Robert. Thank you, Peter. The question about the hospital inspections or not. Firstly, I thought it was right to note that we've completed 100% of the acute non-specialist trusts, which is really good. And we're making good progress with others. I just had a question about the ambulance trusts, which, if we're looking for outliers, seems to be is 40% only done. We've got 2 reports out, neither of which give us huge cause for hope in terms of how good ambulance trusts are. They are a sort of glue to the entire health service in terms of, and therefore affect a wider range of the population than perhaps individual trusts. And I wonder whether we ought to consider the priority given or not given to the inspection of ambulance trusts.
Thanks, Robert, and important question as well. My understanding is that we anticipate completing that next round of trust, community and ambulance trust, by July. I'm right on that, aren't I? It's a shame Mike's not here. So to your point about priority, that's where the priority will go. So the teams that have now completed the non-specialist acute trust will now take forward the work in relation to ambulance trust. I think the point about the robustness of this and the criticality of ambulance to the services is absolutely well made. And I think the other one that we're also taking forward, which has a similar issue, is the functioning of 111 services. Peter and I were in an away day for the NHS England board yesterday, and this was one of the points I was making about what we have found in relation to 111 services and the importance of those services as a system. And there is some fragility in those services, and do we need to wait until the end of our inspection programme before we flag it? If you remember, one of the things that Paul Elliott did is we became concerned about the robustness of drug and alcohol services, so we wrote to all drug and alcohol providers saying this is what we've found so far. We think you should attend to these issues rather than wait to the end of it, where we actually said at the end. If we know something, then what we've been trying to do is flag it early, and I think your comments about ambulance trusts are in that spirit, really. There is more predictability about what we're going to find in some of the ambulance trusts, I think, so we should raise some of those issues now, not at the end of the inspection.
Yes, thank you.
Jennifer.
Thanks. It's just a question about the trends in re-inspections across the sectors and what's happening there, and is there any risk that that trend may offset against our rate of first inspections and make it harder to achieve the target? It's just a sort of background information on that, given we have a fixed pool of inspectors. Thanks.
Well, Andrea will come in for adult social care. I think re-inspections are factored in. Both adult social care and PMS went for high risk first, so theoretically it shouldn't backload this and come through. But again, just to come back to the predictability point, we will need to accommodate any changes that take place and undertake those re-inspections as and when they arise. The minute the business plan is the next item, and I think what we're flagging in the business plan is that we think that the resource we've got for this year that we've just gone into and the further inspection programme we will complete by the end of the year across the piece. That's adult social care and primary medical services. What I think I'd want to have more confidence in is in independent healthcare. I don't think we know what the rate of re-inspection is going to be with any degree of confidence in independent healthcare. So I'm more positive and confident about PMS and adult social care. Andrea will say something in a second. I'm slightly less confident about, it's an extension of Robert's point. I think we know what's going to come out of the ambulance service. I think we're less clear what's going to come out of some of the independent healthcare, and therefore what the rate of re-inspection will be. So I think we've accommodated that in the planning, Jennifer, and I think a good job has been done on that. But it's a kind of it is a Rumsfeld known unknown is the independent healthcare.
Andrea, David said you were going to say something, so you better say
As
something.
you know me, I never miss an opportunity when invited. Just to reassure you, Jennifer, you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that we are returning to inadequate services, and we're returning to requires improvement services within an appropriate timescale, both to ensure that people are protected from harm, but also to give providers the scope and time to make the improvements that they need to make, and that we can see that they're being sustained. So our expectation is that we would go back to inadequate services within 6 months, and that we would go back to requires improvement services within 12 months. In the meantime, we would be monitoring what was happening with those services, in particular if there had been breaches of the regulations, and we've been asking providers to provide us with action plans to reassure us that they are taking the action that they need to take to make the improvements. We had factored that into the previous year's analysis of what we needed to do because of vacancies and those sorts of things. We have not kind of kept pace with the numbers of inspections that we needed to do to complete the comprehensive programme at the original date that we'd set. But in planning the activity for 2016-17, absolutely taking that into account, pay tribute to Paul's team led by Gavin Kennedy, who's done an absolutely amazing job helping us with all of that modelling so that we can focus our efforts on that. We look at the activity on a monthly basis, and one of the things that we're looking at is how many inspections have we done and how many of those inspections have been return inspections, and about 20% of the total inspections are return inspections, and that's actually over the last 2 months I've got figures in front of me for is pretty consistent, so that's what we've built in.
Okay, so is there anything else anybody wanted to raise on? Kay.
Quick point. I know Steve isn't here, but we were going to have an update on the GP roadmap. So I don't know whether you can give that, or whether we don't kind of lose it and maybe hear about it in the next meeting. But it does say we'll have an update on it.
Thanks, Kay. So the delicacy of this is it's not published until tomorrow, I think. So so it is published tomorrow. I can confirm that. And through mainly Paul rather than Steve, there are sections that affect CQC, which we've made a contribution to, and those paragraphs that refer to us will be described in the words that we've provided, and those words anticipate our strategy in relation to issues around the nature of inspection frequencies for GPs. We do not use the words like self-assessment and light touch in that, which is what was covered last week. We're absolutely clear about how consistent with the strategy that is, and it's not our report to publish, it's NHS England's report to publish, but I'm very happy in a private session to say a little bit more about that. But it is being published this week. We have contributed to it. We're content with the way that our position in that is being represented. There's work gone on behind that, and Paul's manfully carried out the negotiation about the final drafting on our behalf, with a bit of welly from me.
Right, are we done on David's report performance? Are we happy to note the report? Great, thank you, David. And I'm sorry, it's still with you, I think, if you want to introduce the business plan and budget, or do you want to go straight to Paul? I don't mind. It's entirely.
I think you've seen iterations for this before. I think an awful lot of work has been done on this. I would like to say well done to Robin Wilson and Chris Usher from the Finance and the Policy and Planning teams for the way that they've done this and accommodated change after change after change with huge patience and forbearance. The report, the covering report is, I think, self-explanatory. We are asking the board today to agree to this business plan. Business plan is a bit dry, in my view. What this is, it's a statement of our priorities for the year. This is our statement of what it is that we're going to make happen this year beyond our normal business as usual. So we're going to carry on inspecting and delivering on our programme, but we're setting out our key 4 priorities. And essentially this is a business plan, a set of priorities which demonstrate we will complete the review of regulation that we started in 2013, but it's also the beginning of the new 5-year strategy as well. So we're going to do 2 things in this year. We're going to finish off what we started in terms of changing the way that we regulate health and care services in England, but we're also going to start the work where we'll build on those foundations, I think is the word that we've used in the strategy, and begin to improve and develop and refine the way we take this forward. So the document sets out the 4 priorities for the organisation, delivering our regulation, shaping the future of regulation, but also 2 that are slightly more inward facing about how we can continue to be a more efficient and effective organisation. This isn't just because the money that we've got available to us is reducing, it's because we need to do that and demonstrate we're an effective organisation. Our ability to hold others to account for how effective they are demands that we're able to demonstrate the same, quite frankly. So priority 3 is about how can we demonstrate we're an effective organisation, what are the improvements that we can make to the way that we operate, how can we become much more cost efficient as an organisation. And then the 4th priority is really about how can we measure the impact of the work that we do. There is an impact and evaluation stream to our work which continues, and the medium-term strategy group considered a report from the people leading that work only yesterday, which I think very encouraging, and we're aiming to produce and publish a report later this year which looks at the evidence. It's an evidence base that we'll need to build over the next 5 years, because I think there is a very genuine question: at what point do you measure impact? 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, which comes from our work, but we've tried to set those issues out. The other issue, if you remember, Public Accounts Committee, I was there, so it's seared on my consciousness. It may be less so for others, but issued the challenge from the National Audit Office report about do we have measures in our business plan which can demonstrate we've delivered the business plan. So there's a much clearer position been taken on KPIs, and we draw attention to that in the report. And I draw a distinction between KPIs for are we delivering the business plan from measures of the assessment of the impact that we make in the way, and that's why I'm juxtaposing these two issues. Business plan itself, I think, has been produced, I think, in a simple style, a nicely simple style, which builds on previous years' documents, and I hope sets out our priorities. Who is this document for? I think this document has multiple audiences. I think it's for people who use services, who are interested to know what we see as our priorities and how we will move forward. I think it's for the sectors that we regulate, the health, social care and primary medical services sectors. So we signal to those sectors what our priorities are and what we're going to do. It is a document for government. The Department of Health need to agree this in the way that this moves forward. But just as important, it's a document for our staff that sets the priorities that we have as an organisation and how we move forward. We've tried to get a balance between the high-level objectives and those 4 priorities, and sufficient detail about who will do what, when, and to what timescale in the document, and I hope that's set out in a clear way. I have a personal antipathy to ongoing as a way of describing it, and but there are 1 or 2 of those because it describes what it is that we are going to do throughout the year as we move forward. Last thing I'd want to draw attention to, and this is surfaced publicly for the first time, is the budget that we'll have available to deliver the programme. And the budget we'll have available is, get the figures right this time, 236. And so as the board is aware, and I think staff within the organisation are aware, that we've been working on a figure of 245 for pretty much the period from last summer up until about the end of February, the beginning of March this year. We've had to readjust some of those calculations from March onwards. That work has now been done. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board will have in relation to that. I think Kate's joined us now with a bit of help from Kate. Yeah. And we can answer those questions, but I do want to draw that out. The board members know I do a message out to staff every Friday. I advise that somebody then sent that to the Daily Mirror, so I don't know whether that's going to be covered in the press today, tomorrow, in relation to this issue about 236. My advice to the board is that 236 is sufficient resource for us to discharge our responsibilities next year, which is, I think, the implicit implication in this message being sent to the media. And part of my confidence of this and making this recommendation to the board is that the executive team have gone through this, and we have a plan, I think, in relation to the way that we'll make arrangements for the delivery of this programme within the resources that we've got available. We're likely to end the last financial year at about 237. A key point for this is that we'll finish about having spent about £1 million more than we begin this year. so we can go at this with some confidence. And I do take the opportunity to remind the board, I think there's only Kate on the board at this time, but I think the budget in 2012 when I began this job was 160 million. So even at the end of this programme, when it's 217 million, we're still 57 million up on where we began in 2012. So I think it's really important to focus on what we've got, not what we've not got based on last year's budget, particularly when we didn't spend 249, we spent 237. So it's a bit of context that I don't want to lay on too thickly, but it's important we are able to contextualise this. So to summarise, Peter and colleagues, what we've got is a business plan that has been through many, many iterations in both the organisation, the executive team, and I think in pre-work with the board. I commend it as a good piece of work to the board, and it's sat within a financial envelope of 236, which is an envelope that I'm confident we can deliver our responsibilities during 2016-17. So I invite the board to consider this business plan, and I invite you to approve it, and then we can publish it both within the organisation and to our stakeholders and members of the general public. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, David. Kate, why don't you come and sit here, so if you do need to intervene and correct anything that I or David or anybody else says, you don't have to struggle for a microphone. And I just want to pick up the last point David was making. The comparison we need to make with the budget is on what we actually spent last year, not some figure that we one time thought we might spend but didn't. And I personally haven't been through this at some length, and some of the other non-executives, Paul, you were there, we went through this in a meeting on Monday. So I think I'm very confident that the money we've got is the money we need to do the job next year. So I just reinforce what David's just said. Paul or Eileen, before we open it up, is there anything either of you want to add, having been involved in the process, or Kate, since you're here? No. Right. So, comments, questions? Kate.
I always have one. I mean, it's fine, you know. I think it's a good piece of work. But I'm sort of struck that there's not anything in it about involving service users. And I know that we do that. But I was just sort of thinking about the experts by experience, and it seems to me that there is a little bit of work that needs to be done. It doesn't need to cost a lot, but to make sure that well, two things really. One is to make sure that the values that underpin experts by experience, and David, you'll know about this because you were involved with CSCI, which is about involving people with lived experience of current and recent services actually involved in doing and regulating services, doing inspections and regulating services. And obviously we're changing, and I think it would be a good time to just have a little kind of review of it, to make sure that we are true to the values of it, and that it's developed in a way that fits with how we're developing as an organisation. And I mean, I think it would probably come under priority 3, build an effective learning and values-based CQC. But I think given that there's nothing in the business plan about involvement, and the fact that we're just starting new contracts with experts by experience, and we're changing, I just think it would be a very good time to do a bit of a review, and for it to be in the business plan.
Yeah, Paul, go
on. Thanks, Kate. So the business plan and the strategies are meshed together, don't they? So we'll discuss the strategy a bit in the private section, and then in more detail in the public session in May. And that certainly does talk about involvement in the use of experts by experience. As you say, we've got the new contracts in place which sort of strengthen our commitment. We do have a commitment in the business plan as to how we measure the effectiveness of how we inspect services, and one of the ways in which those measures are, as it says, is that experts by experience say they were actively involved in our inspections and judgments. So we will be measuring it, but I think the suggestion is that we make something concrete or specific in the business plan in terms of activity. And I think we can do that around our plans to deploy experts by experience in line with the contract that we've now let. I think we can absolutely do that. With that.
I suppose that I'm just wondering. I mean, maybe it is clear, but I think, in some sense, we have sort of departed a little bit from the original values of experts by experience, and I just wondered if it's worth revisiting them and also considering how the role of experts by experience could develop as we go forward.
Okay, I think Paul's sort of touching on the right point here. In an ideal world, we would have published the strategy and the business plan and the budget probably in that order or in the same time. The combination of the need to consult on the strategy and then the PERDA periods delaying the publication mean that they're sort of coming out in a sense in the wrong order. So what I suggest we do is in the next board meeting, when, as Paul said, we'll have all three to discuss, we can then make sure that we've picked this up. So I don't disagree with you. I know there are lots of other bits of work that aren't specifically referenced in the business plan that will have to be done over the next 12 months. So let's come back to that next month, but absolutely not to lose the point. Is that okay? Yeah. Lewis.
Well, can I make what is, I suppose, a similar point, but it's about the wider public. And I actually thought this was quite a good document, and it was. And one of the reasons for that is that in the starting diagram, it refers specifically to the need to achieve a level of public confidence, improve public confidence in what we do. And sorry if you've heard me say this before, but I feel that in the end, that's got to be certainly one of, but possibly the main standard by which our work is judged. So do the public, when they're going to use a service, check on what we've said about it. Do they feel that our ratings are reliable and that they're recognisable, that their experience is recognised in what we say about something? So I suppose it's not, but I'm not just talking about the experts by experience issue. This is the wider public. And so that's mentioned in the document. It's in that first diagram. I'm not a big fan of these composite box diagrams, but actually this is quite a good one. And that's one of the reasons. But what I'm not then clear about is what we're doing about it. It doesn't, and I think that this has been a long-standing issue in a way that where it is obviously quite a difficult issue. It's not, public confidence isn't just a button you can press and, or for that matter, a number that you can measure. But on the other hand, I think unless we start to tackle what it will mean in practice, then I'm not sure we'll ever get there. In one sense, that's a broad strategic question for us, but in another, it has practical consequences, practical implications for how we work, and therefore it is part of our business, particularly, I suppose, because, in my view, it's such an important part of what we're here to achieve. I'm actually less clear that there is a strong read across between the overall strategy and the business plan, I have to say, but in the way the two documents come across. But if we can get that right in the strategy and then set out what we're going to do about it in the coming year, that would help. Otherwise, there's a slight feeling that we would like to be able to achieve it, but we're not absolutely sure what we're doing about it.
Well, somebody should be congratulated for producing a chart that you almost damned with faint praise, and then and then came back and said, "Well, it actually really is quite good." Rob, let's take some other points, and we'll come back on that.
Well, actually, I for once I found this less opaque than many things, and that isn't damning it for praise, and it's enabled me to spot two things that perhaps I've not spotted before or therefore ask a question about. One is a point about are we being over-ambitious, and one is whether we lack ambition. And the first point relates to the KPI about the staff survey, only to increase the staff engagement by 1 point. I'm not quite sure what 1 point means, but that sounds to be a little unambitious. There's no mention anywhere of any concern about bullying and harassment and so on, which has been a concern, and I wonder whether that ought to be mentioned. That's sort of one little box. The other box is only likely, but a variance of 0% on the budget. I've never known any organisation that's ever achieved that. What, is that being over-ambitious?
You can answer the last one in a moment. Yes, go on, Heidi.
I think Robert raises an incredibly important point about our staff, and the staff survey is a key measure that we use to engage and understand how our staff are feeling. I think around the engagement index, I think it's right to note that we actually already have a high engagement index. So it actually requires a significant shift to move that upwards. So although 1% might seem exceedingly modest, it is quite realistic when you already have a high score. So we could put a higher number in, and we are working very hard with all the stuff that has come out of the staff survey, particularly around bullying and harassment, which are important issues. And I think of two particular directorates that are actually doing a lot of focused and bespoke work with staff on it. So we can certainly put it in, but I wouldn't want you to leave you in any doubt that people say this and we don't do anything with it. The work is ongoing. So very happy to look at that. Around the engagement index, I think 1% is realistically ambitious, because I think the ambition word is right, and I think David and all of us are ambitious for our people, and that they should feel engaged and part of a high-performing organisation, and this is one measure of it. But 1% is actually something to strive for against this index.
Can I just add to that, if I may, Peter? Sorry, Jane. We will collect bullying and harassment as both, where allegations come in, we'll collect those, but we also do it as part of the staff survey. So to the KPI point, I think what we wanted to do is distill the KPIs that were going to be part of the way we measured the business plan. It's not a reduction of the total number of data that we collect. So I think to this reporting, I personally don't have a problem about including the bullying and harassment.
Well, the only reason, obviously I understood that this doesn't mean we're not doing other things themselves, but it just struck me that being something we ought to signal by having it in the plan, that we consider it to be very important.
Can make some last-minute tweaks and make the tweaks and put
So on the bullying and harassment, I think the answer is yes. On the KPI for the staff survey, I think we're saying we should leave it where it is. Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you, Jane. Sorry.
I'm sorry to take you a step back in the conversation. I wouldn't want Kay to think that Experts by Experience is the only game in town. I've got here our own CQC Health Watch joint publication on how we work together to get the voice heard, including the ambulance service in Yorkshire, which sounded a really good piece of work by everyone around the table. But I do think that listening to Lewis and to Kay and to others, there's a bigger piece of work you have here, Health Watch. That's all we do is listen to the patient's voice. We may be in danger of acquiring some expertise in how to listen to the user's voice. So maybe as we go forward, working together, we can do a bigger piece of work on this.
Good. Thank you, Jane. Other comments? Paul? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Peter. Just going to the money a little bit, we've heard how both the Chief Executive and the Finance Director are comfortable with being able to hit the targets of 236 million, and why that is. I think we do need to understand as a board that while we may be only spending 237 million this year as against 236 last year, actually that 237 million has been on a rising trajectory. So to come off a rising trajectory onto a plateau and then actually down in the future is actually a challenge in that respect. And in fact, I think the 249 million, while it may have been that we were budgeting originally, did include cost pressures that would be included with about 6 million or 7 million that were coming in because of things that we've been actually building up during the year, which would be cost pressures in the next year. So that trajectory is an important thing to have in the back of your minds in that respect. So it is a little bit more challenging than might have otherwise been portrayed to get down to that plateau, I think it's fair to say. but what we did hear on Monday was that the executive team have done a lot of hard work to get at the detail behind what the budget comprises that is, and are confident, I think, that they can get to that within the that they've got the resources to carry out the plan, and that they can actually control the costs to within that. I think that's fair, Kate, is that to say? Do you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good summary. I think a lot of the hard work has been done by the executive team, and we've had the trajectory going up. It's coming down over the following year to prepare us for future years. So we've got that profile, and we're confident that we can deliver that. But at the same time, that has to be underpinned by really robust reporting to the executive team, to the board, and we're going to stay on top of that this year.
Can I just
carry on?
Two other points. I think, possibly three other points. The first one is that while we've got, I think, the revenue budget agreed with the department in terms of what we're at, I'm not sure whether we have the capital budget yet finalised.
Not formally.
Okay. But we need to get that, because we obviously have a capital that we're spending, and that we need to be sure that we've got the capital allocation to get with that. The second point is that I think we do need to work on a medium-term plan, not just a financial plan, but a business plan, which is not going to be at quite this level of detail, but is the link between the strategy and what we're actually going to be doing year by year, because there's an awful lot of things that we need to understand how we are going to deliver the strategy, and that piece, I think, is started, but it's not yet, isn't going to be available by the next board meeting, but there does need to be work done on that. And then the third bit is just pick up on it, because I had the same point as Robert about 0% as a variance. I think we should probably just put a figure in of millions of pounds, whatever the figure happens to be, rather than a percentage figure on against the budgets, so within a figure.
So I was going to say, if it's 0%, it seems that money might be quite simple. But I could be persuaded either way, and it's up to others. But we have a budget. I'm not sure that aiming to hit the budget precisely is the wrong thing to do.
No, but if we have a KPI that we're going to be measured by the committee against, then being realistic about it as to what we consider to be an effective. Anyway, I'll leave that.
Well, as long as it's a minus number, not a positive number. I think that's what we're trying to get at. This is the incentive. It's a good challenge, Paul. As ever, you bring real value to this. So I think the issue is we cannot overspend our budget. That's the message that I'd want to give as accounting officer. So that's set in a way that says we must come in on that. We know it's going to be tight. We underspent by 13 million this year. No, let me do the arithmetic. 13 million. So I think the key issue here is we haven't got that latitude next year. We need a financial discipline across the organisation, which I think is partly the point that you're making from the previous points that we need to get to. So as long as that is a number that is variance is minus number, not a plus number, is what we should be aiming for, because we've been pretty clear as an executive team. I've been clear with my colleagues that we're not overspending. We're going to land this within the money. That's what we expect people out there to do, and that's what we've got to do. So we're pretty clear about needing to do that.
Yeah, then I understand what is meant, but I don't think that's what 0% means. So I think you actually want a ceiling, which is we will not overspend. And anything else, and if it looks as though we're going to do that, that's a matter which is serious and needs to be considered by us.
Peter, if I may, one of the things I think is coming from this is there's one or two tweaks going to be required to this before we publish it this week. So if I could just have some licence with Kate to put in a figure in relation to that, and we'll put a form of words in, which is what I've just said, which is we're not going to overspend our budget, and that's what we're setting out to do.
Okay, people are happy with that. And then, Paul, on your point about the sort of the medium term and the glide path from where we are now to where we're going to be. I mean, I think this is really, really important. We discussed this a bit on Monday, and so I do think as a board and as an executive group, this is going to be a really high level of priority, because we have to do this in an orderly way to make sure that we are able to fulfil all our obligations within the money that we've got. I actually am very confident we can do that, but we can only do it if we plan well in advance. And so I think that is going to be a major piece of work over the next, not just the next 12 months, but actually over the whole period of the strategy as it happens.
If I could just, that's absolutely right, Peter. I think the important thing to remember is that we've not only got a glide path in terms of reduction in our budgets over that period of time, but we have a lot that we need to do in terms of investment over that time to achieve the changes that we want to make to be that more effective and efficient organisation. Those things don't come without some cost. So there is within the glide path also some one-off type expenditure to get to that, and it's planning that which is absolutely essential as well as we go forward. So it's a quite a complex task, and it's a tough task, but it's one that we need to actually plan out how we're going to do it.
100% agree. Other comments, if any? Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. Beg your pardon.
I can pick up on Lewis's comment about public confidence, if that's helpful.
Yep.
So 3 or 4 points. As David said, the Public Health Committee, and as other people have said as well, we do survey people about our work, not just about asking them to share their experiences with us. And people are increasingly confident, particularly about our new approach. So that's positive, but we'll keep doing that. Will form an important part of our own evaluation. We have the Share Your Experience work, which is a good opportunity for people receiving any form of care or their loved ones to tell us, as you know about, and that already exists through the phone lines, through the website, and through forms. One of the things that we're doing, so the next phase of our sort of digital work, is to roll out things like apps that we've talked about in the past to make it even easier for people to give us their experiences. That's with the Department of Health at the moment, and as soon as that's approved, that's in the first wave of things that we will do. There's a lot of work that's been led by Eileen and by Tracy Forrester, with involvement from colleagues in my area, about getting better at responding to concerns. I think we might cover that in the RGC updates to follow. But clearly there's something about people's confidence in us is at least partially determined by how well we close the loop when we are told about things, so that people are not left hanging, people know what we've done about it. And we also have the public engagement strategy, which is published on our website from January 2015, which talks about how we can improve how we're engaging with people. I think, Kay, you've previously asked if we can bring that back to the board, and the view is to do that after the main strategy has been published. So we're expecting to do that in the next few months. That might be a good opportunity to talk in a bit more detail about how the plans are being implemented.
That's a really helpful answer. Did I miss it? Is it in our business plan, or what you've just outlined? Because I suppose it's a way of signalling how important this area is for us. And you've just told us some of that I knew, but some of it I didn't know, actually. And,
Yeah, so let's go back to the business plan and see line by line whether everything I've said is in it. So when we talk about things like CQC Insight, and we talk about that as an evolution from intelligent monitoring, one of the biggest single things that it will move us away from is being overly reliant on individual pieces of quantitative data, and able to bring in much more of the evidence from people who are using services and telling us what their experience is. And that's also why we invested in those intelligence tools, one of which is this thing we call the qualitative tool. It's our ability to look at all those hundreds of thousands of bits of information, whether it's direct to us or whether it's on social media or through friends and family tests, whatever it might be, to look at that data that people are just writing down and draw out the themes and trends from it. So we can look in the business plan as to whether we can bring that out more fully, but certainly that's the intent when we talk about things like CQC Insight.
So I propose we do, given that we're in the last knockings of tweaking, is we'll put a sentence in, probably in priority 3, which picks up on Kay's bit about reviewing engagement, picks up on Jane's bit about working with Healthwatch England, picks up on Paul's point about digital, and then lands it. The responding to concerns is in there, so we'll find a way of just connecting those 4 things in that way to draw it out. So the opacity, I think, which is being referred to, is removed. This is work that would go on. And I've been encouraging Paul and Chris to continually review how we engage with people. Not so we lose the tradition, Kay. I think you're absolutely right with this. It's absolutely essential to our values, but we just need to rethink this. I think this point that Paul's just made about digital, the fact that Healthwatch England is more closely associated with us, both present opportunities that we've not hitherto had that we actually need to take. So let's just tweak that, if I may, Peter, and we'll get a form of words that will get this out the door sometime this week.
Any other tweaks? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no tweaks. I thought it was very good, actually, the whole thing, very admirably succinct. The only comment I just wanted to make was that clearly some of the comments made today are about inclusions of other things that we value in the activity that the CQC carries out. And some of those things are, as mentioned, in the evaluation, the wider evaluation. So the point I want to make is that when we get to look at the evaluation, it may be useful to see if there are some things that could be pulled out of that for next year's KPIs that we do value. So if you like, it's this kind of pyramid, isn't it? These are abstracted and measurable from what is a much bigger sort of base of the pyramid, which is information on our impact, which we value. Some of that information in the bigger pyramid is just from one-off studies and can't be used as KPIs, but some might be. So it's just a more, a bigger discussion that we could have at that point when we look at the impact.
Thank you. Good. That was actually a really, really helpful debate. I think some really good points came out. So if the board is happy to approve the business plan, subject to the tweaks that we have agreed, it then goes to DH. We're required to get DH sign off, and the intention is to publish next week. Are we all content with that? Perfect. Thank you. That was really good. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Kate. And Kate, just thanks to you and your team for all the hard work that lies behind all of this. Thank you very much indeed. Good. Lewis.
Yesterday evening I chaired the RGC Regulatory Governance Committee in Michael's absence. And just to remind you, there's a proper report will come back to the next board meeting. So this is a sort of overnight summary of what was talked about yesterday. Thanks very much to Martin for preparing it for today. So there's a paper tabled. I'm just going to highlight one or two of the issues that came out. Essentially, the meeting yesterday was receiving reports. I suppose that was the general theme of it. It was quite a meaty meeting. So apologies if I don't represent every important point that came through it, but just to mention one or two things. Not quite in the order that they're on the written report, but first of all, we received 2 internal audit reports. One which was about evidencing regulatory decisions, and the other one about quality of external facing analysis. And the common theme of these 2 reports was strengthening the evidence on which we base our decisions, our ratings and our public statements. And part of the origin, at least in one of the reports, was the intelligent monitoring and the need to get that right at an earlier stage in the evolution of the new model, particularly in relation to primary care. To summarise what came out of that, I think there's a much more, where we're heading to, I suppose, a much more robust way of using evidence. First of all, collecting better evidence, focusing on the things that matter, and in particular, and this was the theme of the 2 reports, challenging evidence from, say, regulation and inspection, and in particular when it comes from outside bodies, because we use a lot of evidence that other people give us. So that sense of challenge, strengthening that sense of challenge as a way of improving our own decision-making ability in our own public-facing statements. It was quite interesting, I think, that there was a sense that we've been on a sort of an evolution over the last couple of years, starting with scrambling around. I don't think anybody said that, but I'm interpreting. Trying to get the best data we could, looking at what's available, trying to use everything that was around to make the best use we could of what people had previously collected, feeding that through into our evaluations of services. And I think we're now into a new phase where we can take a more refined position. We can be more challenging of what people tell us, as well as what decisions we ourselves make. We can make sure our inspection teams are better informed with the key bits of information about a service before they go in, and so on. So although these two reports were considering certain bits of the evidence system, the implication is much broader. It's about how evidence is, first of all, collected, how it's fed through into an inspection system, how it's then challenged before it makes its way into the public domain, and how we don't simply accept what people tell us, but challenge it, and query it, and sort of sieve it in some ways. So it was a very helpful discussion, very helpful indication that in the future we'll be much more confident about the evidence that we base our judgments on. The two reports, by the way, gave a rating of moderate to our processes in this area, and gave some useful advice on how they might be improved. Second thing is that was a sort of update report on the Responding to Concerns programme. I suppose to summarise that, this was a report to that committee on just on the work that's going on. It's a continuing piece of work. This was a phase 1 report, and it's about how we respond when people raise concerns with us about a service. And the themes, I suppose, were about making sure that people get a reasonable response. It may not be us who has to respond directly, so it's often about signposting people to the right place when they've raised a concern with us, but how we respond in the right way, how we're clear about our own role. I think there's been quite a bit of uncertainty about what exactly our role is when people raise concerns, the whole whistleblower issue. And there are quite a few people now on the whistleblower landscape, and we need to be clear what we do and what other people do. And this piece of work is about trying to achieve that kind of clarity, but at the same time not make people feel that they've been sort of fobbed off to another organisation that they now have to start again with. It was a very helpful report to hear about. I mean, I must say I was struck not just by the issue of responding well and getting the clarity right, but also by the sheer volume of concerns that are raised with us. That is really striking. How many people come to us to raise concerns, and getting it right for so many people is quite a major task. So that was the subject of the report and the discussion, and there are further reports to come. The third thing was about adult social care. We had a series of papers and presentations about social care, and to some extent this follows what I'm sorry, this is a slightly over-familiar theme, but what follows an inspection of a care home that I went on as an observer. But it triggered a number of points which are about the broader way in which we inspect care homes and our adult social care function. And just to summarise a couple of points, one of the concerns that came out of that was if a care home is in such a poor state that we are considering closure, the inspection team is considering closure, but decide for various reasons that carries risks, what else do we do? What do we do that's sort of proportionate to the concern? Given the example of this particular care home, Andrea's team came back with the story of what happened subsequently after following the inspection of that particular care home, and it was a very interesting story about about the different agencies who might then be involved: the local authority, the fire service, the potential for prosecution, so the justice system, plus our own re-inspection, of course. And I must say that as the person who first raised the concern about this care home, and also, as it happened, chairing this meeting yesterday, I thought it presented a very good picture of how strongly we can respond, and how some of our newer powers in particular give us powers to do the right thing in a very in a reasonably urgent and very robust way when standards are falling in care homes. And for me, this is one of the main things we do, one of the most important things that CQC does. And it was a reassuring presentation about the robustness of our approach. There was a specific point, which was about telling relatives when care homes essentially do badly in our inspections. And although we require care homes to put the rating on their website and display it at the care home, there are obvious problems in that. One is some care homes don't have a website, so there's a rather intriguing way of avoiding putting things on your website. Don't have one. And some, of course, are displaying the rating, but it's not in a way that's visible to the residents, and certainly not to the relatives who might be calling in and not really checking the notice board. So that's an area I think that we're trying to grapple with, possibly using duty of candour. I don't know if you want to say any more, just to mention that point. I think this is a very important point about our relationship with the public and with the families of people who are residents, informing them when something has been found that they should be aware of, whether it's good or bad, actually, I must say. Again, I think there's a sense that we are doing better on this than may sometimes come across. That's it.
Good, thank you. I was really sorry not to be there myself yesterday, even more so having heard that. Just before, Jane, you take your card, Andrew, do you want to add to anything on the last point?
Just to say that I was joined at the committee with two of my Deputy Chief Inspectors, Sally Warren, for the registration discussion that we had, and Debbie Westhead, who not only is the Deputy Chief Inspector for the North, which covers the area of the inspection that Lewis attended, but also leads on our continuous improvement group within adult social care and for enforcement across the whole of CQC in terms of taking forward our developments in that area. And those of you who know Debbie will know the energy with which she goes about these things in terms of trying to tackle that, and particularly on this the issue that Lewis has raised before and we've discussed around ensuring that the information, the findings that we have from an inspection are shared with people in a very proactive way. And what Debbie was able to describe was where we have effectively use the duty of candour regulation in the sense of saying there has been a serious kind of incident in the sense of harm or neglect has been visited upon people because of the circumstances that we've found, and in that way we would require the provider to share with relatives and residents the findings of our report, and that we would kind of, we would make that requirement of them, which we could then follow up. As well as we described to the committee last night the arrangements that we're making to ensure that, albeit I completely take the point that some of the smaller services may not have their own website, but the vast majority do, that we will be expecting to follow up after they've had their grace period for when the report is published, to make sure that the rating is indeed on the website. We have issued fixed penalty notices where that has not been the case, and indeed issued 12 fixed penalty notices for one particular provider who was failing to improve their website so that they could do it, and lo and behold, after we did that, they did indeed improve their website. So there are things that we are very proactively doing to try and improve this situation.
Good. Thank you. Jane.
Thank you. This is my first appearance. I have to say the Regulatory Governance Committee doesn't sound as though it's going to be very exciting, but it was really good. And it's absolutely where our sort of key business competency is. I thought there was some I don't want to sound too girlishly enthusiastic, but there was some very good learning going on there, and it gave me a lot more confidence about the inspection process. There are also a couple of opportunities for CQC to lead the field in this area that we were looking at. One was when we were talking about the information that's required for inspections, and Paul was sort of, bringing it down to, well, we sort of pretty much know now what are the most important things we need to know. And there's another line of thought out there which says that there are lots of inspections going on, and there's a wish, isn't there, that not everybody will be asking for all different sets of information. And I think there's a real opportunity for CQC to take some leadership in identifying that information set for inspections that might actually lighten the regulatory burden, which has to be a good thing. So that was one. And the other one, I think we were all very impressed by the presentation on the telephone service and the calls that come in and the way that's being dealt with. There was a certain feeling that I'm sure we could always carry on learning better, but it really felt, I mean, Eileen said she'd been sitting and listening in to some of these calls, but it really felt as if we are doing this in a way that's compassionate and is getting results, but also is controlling it. So I know from our experience in Health Watch, if you do get somebody on the telephone and you're not, you just don't, you're answering almost like a human being rather than a member of a professional organisation, it can go on for a long time, and actually that's not the best use of your time, or maybe not the best result for the person at the other end of the phone. So we've got a professional grip on that, and I think that's something else we can show leadership in.
I must say I've also sat in on some of these calls, Jane, and the way we handle them, I was really impressed. I totally agree. Paul, do you want to comment on first point?
It was exactly so in those two internal audit reviews. So by starting, I think one of the things that we find through the strategy and the ongoing discussions is people ask the question, if you're regulating us, then who is checking that you're doing the things? And the board has a role there, and Parliament and the rest. But so internal audit is an important element, and those reports go to the Department of Health as well. The one on the quality assurance of external analyses, that was a follow-up report, as Lewis says, in light of the mistakes that we made on GP intelligent monitoring, and it showed a substantial improvement in the work. And I think one of the things that we say a lot to providers is, when you get a report that shows that there are things which aren't right, how are you learning from them, and when we come back? So it's pretty important, I think, to the individuals who were responsible for the intelligent monitoring, that they entered into the same spirit. So it's been quite a lot of cultural change work in intelligence, and I wanted to sort of take that opportunity to say, for Emma Rourke and her team, could have responded in a very different way, but I don't think we'd have seen, I think the figure is 74% of the sales have improved. We wouldn't have seen that improvement without that part of CQC being willing to learn from what had happened in the past.
It does seem to me, Lewis, also there's a connection between one of the points that you made earlier on. The more users of service are aware of our role and have confidence in it, and then refer to our website for the information, then there's another way of getting a read across into, when did you last inspect the service that I'm using or my family are using, and what did you find when you were there? So all these things sort of connect to each other. Paul, can you just, sorry, unfair question probably, but just for my information, where would moderate in internal audit language fit on our ratings between outstanding?
I knew you were going to ask. I was going to make the point for the benefit of others. Broadly speaking, there are 4 grades, if you like, of assurance report. Starting at the best you can do is full assurance. Then you get moderate assurance, then you get limited assurance, and then you get no assurance. Now, there happen to be 4 grades. Don't necessarily read those across directly against our rating system, but it's not a long way different from that. And I think what I would say is that the audit committees really focus on where you have limited assurance or no assurance, which is really not very helpful. That's where we tend to focus our attention. Moderate assurance tends to mean there's more about learning and some improvements that can come out of it. So not directly across, but so moderate assurance is, I suppose you could say, is a pretty reasonable result out of that. And I don't worry too much about moderate assurance.
Slightly better than you might otherwise think from the choice of the word.
No, I think it's probably more. I mean, moderate assurance is, in a very technical sense, moderate assurance is quite a good level of assurance.
Yeah. I think just that was worth making. Doesn't mean we're complacent about it.
So the word moderate is accountants going overboard.
That's it. We get really excited about being moderate. You're right.
Is there any other business anybody wanted to raise after that? Great. So that ends the business of the public board. We've got, depending on which clock I look at, 1 minute, or my watch says no minutes. So we'll just take, if there is a point that somebody from the public wanted to raise, and Jade, you put your hand up first. So would you like to come to the microphone here and say for everybody else who you are, and then whatever you want to say.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jade Taylor, and I'm here this morning in a sort of patient safety campaigning capacity. I also am a health professional, and I manage an intermediate care team in Reading. That's my substantive post at present. There's just one thing that came up. You were talking about the thematic review of deaths. And one thing that struck me from the start is that there is lots of discussion about families being involved, which is brilliant. Having been on both sides of this, as I'm sure many of us in the room have and many of the wider public, often as a member of staff, I've known more about the incidence of a death than the family has. And I found out what happened to my late parents mostly on the television. But that was perhaps lack of my own engagement because of circumstances. But the thing I want to bring up this morning is, and I'm aware we've got limited time, is the theme I wanted to bring up was bias and unconscious bias. And I was hearing as well that you were talking about engagement and engaging with the wider public. And I just wondered, can I just have a show of hands? Who likes stories here? Who likes stories? Okay, right. Can I tell you a short story? This story is about, it's actually from a film, and it's about two characters called Tobias and Beatrice. And to cut a long story short, and without adding any more confusion, Tobias is actually kind of brainwashed, and he's put into this simulation. And in this simulation, he's told to kill Beatrice, who he's actually in love with. And as the theme unravels, Tris realises she has to find some kind of way to grab his attention and to bring him back and to help him to realise that, you know, what he's doing is not a good way forward. And she manages to work that out, and she manages to stop him doing what he's doing. And I think that there's a story to be learnt there for all of us, because we all, being human beings, we all have unconscious bias. And I'll just share with you an incident in my career where I was guilty of unconscious bias. 15 or so years ago, I was working in an inpatient unit, and there was no means of identifying patients really at all. The means of identification was by a member of staff remembering, through visual memory, people's identities. There were no wristbands, there were no photographs. As a result of this, I gave somebody the wrong tablet. And it was only, when you say only, it was a Zopiclone tablet. It wasn't going to do the person any harm. I told the patient straight away. This patient wasn't able fully to describe his, identify himself to me. It caused a lot of distress. Afterwards, I, of course, sat there and tried to explain away my actions and thought, well, it was unreasonable for this to happen. But really, as a professional, I needed to sit there and think, well, there are lessons to be learnt there, and that I should have known that that means of identification was never going to bring me accuracy. And I think there's also lessons to be learnt as well in terms of all of us here and how we think about unconscious bias and how we react to each other and the wider public. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I think that there are instances of unconscious bias, perhaps how sort of this board refers to staff who are trying to raise concerns. I think there are prejudices that maybe we don't want to admit to, but I think they need to be explored more. And I think there are, I'm really sorry, Robert, but I think there are, in terms of the Freedom to Speak Up review, I don't actually really know one whistleblower who agrees with the recommendations, and I think it's very difficult for me to say this, and hence why I wanted to share my own failings in terms of my drugs there. But I think we need, and I've mentioned this to Peter, I think we need a recall of everyone who, whistleblowers who took part in that, to look at that again, to look at how we can move forward. Because there is, as somebody on Twitter said the other day, there's literally human wreckage happening all the time. And behind every whistleblower there is a human life, there is a family, there is a patient usually, who sometimes don't even know what's been happening to them. And there are staff who are living with these things and living for years with them not ever being addressed and resolved. And I know it's a really difficult issue to come to grips with, and it's very difficult for us to admit to our mistakes. But if I can do it, very publicly, then I'm sure, other people can. So I think my reason to come here this morning was to be constructive and to try and engage with you all, and just to say, I think it's an area that needs to be thought through.
Jane,
thank you.
No, thank you very much. I don't think that any particular response right now to the various points you've made is appropriate, but what I can say is that every one of us have just heard what you have just said, so thank you very much indeed. And that we are now overrunning, but anyway, we will break. Thank you all very much indeed.